for North Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And can I start by commending the member for Werriwa for bringing forward this motion, which I think is an important one for this chamber and this parliament. It is imperative that governments unite to pursue strong international action to prevent all unlawful attacks on schools and other educational facilities in conflict zones. All Australians would be appalled, I think, that in the 21st century, schools, childcare centres and universities are bombed, shelled and burned or used for military activities or recruitment. This has no place in modern society. Yet tragically we know that this is occurring in many conflict zones, from Afghanistan to Syria to South Sudan. Indeed, instances of attacks on schools and students have been documented in 30 countries since 2010. The actions of those engaged in military activity can have both immediate and longer-term impacts on students and their places of study. Often schools and universities are commandeered by military forces. In some cases, this occurs while schools are still operating and, remarkably, students are still present. The impact of such deployments can be devastating. Essential civilian infrastructure becomes overnight a military target. Students can find themselves literally in the firing line because what should be a sanctuary of learning has become the centre of a battle zone. Students and their teachers are often the casualties of war, and it's hard not to hypothesise that at times armed forces will use schools in the hope that the young students present will act as some kind of barbaric human shield. And in some cases, schools are deliberately targeted, even when not occupied by combatant forces. Such attacks are designed to demoralise and cause harm to civilians, and I think we've seen that most dramatically in Aleppo in recent times. In addition to the loss of life, the use of education facilities during conflicts can have a devastating impact on the educational infrastructure of a nation. The military occupation of educational premises will often have the immediate impact of closing schools, denying their students of an education for often long periods. Their destruction as part of military conflict can take a generation to rebuild. The UN Declaration on Human Rights says that education is a fundamental human right. It promotes individual freedom and empowerment and yields important development benefits. During and in the aftermath of conflict, this right can be so easily extinguished, setting back both the progress of individuals and entire communities and nations. Mr Deputy Speaker, we cannot and must not stand by as children in conflict zones around the world have their opportunities ruined. Schools and childcare centres should be a place of friendship, love, learning and, above all, safety. It should not be a place where students and educators live in fear of attack or being captured by military forces. We must unite with our international counterparts to say that schools are a no-go zone for conflict and military action of any kind. Mr Deputy Speaker, I note that under international humanitarian law, educational facilities are ordinarily protected from military conflict as civilian sites, and that the Australian Government works extensively to encourage respect and adherence to those requirements of international law. I'm proud of the fact that Australia, during its time as a member of the Security Council, so vigorously supported the adoption of Resolution 2143. This was an important resolution from the Security Council, which clearly sets out the expectations in strong terms of the global community in relation to the protection of children in armed conflicts. Clauses 16 to 18 of that resolution make clear that during conflicts and post-conflict periods, children should have access to health and educational facilities. It reiterates that attacks on educational institutions are contrary to international law. Resolutions such as this, along with established international law, provide a strong framework for responding to and deterring the military use of schools and universities. Many NGOs working in Australia are also at the forefront of international efforts. For example, UNICEF, Save the Children and Human Rights Watch have been very active in trying to highlight concerns about this area. I'm pleased that the government is supportive of the guidelines for protecting schools and universities from military use during armed conflict, which have been endorsed by the Safe Schools Declaration. I do understand, however, that the government does have some concerns about the language of the Safe Schools Declaration and its consistency with international humanitarian law. I would hope that these can be overcome. Nonetheless, the sentiment of the member for Werriwa's motion is an important one in reminding us all of the importance of international vigilance. More can be done and more must be done. That is stating the obvious. We must work with all governments around the world to prevent attacks on schools and condemn the use of school grounds and facilities for military action and training. They should be places of learning, not places of death and suffering. Thank you.